Well, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a very interesting situation. I was alerted to this last night, and this is from 3 days ago. It's not from a while ago. You can see the Pennsylvania Department of State coming out and saying that they won't always know the final results of all races on election night. They're already prepping people for the idea that Pennsylvania will not have all their votes counted, or at least most, because, see, there's a difference. People say, well, none of the states technically have all their votes counted, but if you've got over 99%, you can call a state 9 times out of 10. Remember 2016. They always say, oh, 2020 was so close, it's normal for it to take days. 2016, Pennsylvania was very close. They called Pennsylvania for Trump at around, I would say 2 a.m., maybe 2:30 in the morning. That's Eastern Standard Time. And that's a very close state. It was like decided by a point. So they've come out now. And listen, I can understand in 2020, if you want to say, oh, it's the pandemic, it's going to take longer based on the infrastructure that we have in Pennsylvania. You also have to understand all of the states operate on different frequencies when it comes to counting votes. That's why Florida lapsed the field because of what happened in 2000, where Bush won extremely close election. It was just decided by Florida. They upgraded their entire system. They count mail-in ballots before. There's a few other states that do it, like Ohio. That's why you always see, in 2016, Hillary went up early in Ohio by like 10, 15 points. In 2020, Biden went up early in Ohio by 15, 20 points. In Pennsylvania, it's basically the opposite. That's why Trump was leading by like 17 points at 2 a.m. with like 74% of the vote counted in 2020. They do it the opposite. They don't count the mail-in ballots early. I think it should be a countrywide thing to where we all operate under one system, to where you're not dealing with all these different states counting different votes at different times, and it's a complete wobbly mess. Any changes in results that occur as counties continue to count ballots are not evidence that the election is rigged, but it makes the whole process seem illegitimate when you are taking days and you're constantly finding votes, and it's just ridiculous. So back in 2016, it was a very close state. Pennsylvania was. It was like 1 point, 2 points. It was called on election night. And we've said we want the race to be decided on election night. We don't want it to drag on. And I've said the reason I think it will be is because it's different than the 2020 situation where you had all the COVID mess, the mail-in mess, where they, of course, say, remember, the Democrats said this is normal, this is standard how elections operate. It's total gaslighting. It's not even close. You've got European countries having to ban mail-in voting because of a rampant voter fraud. I'm not saying mail-in voting is not going to still exist. It probably will just because of the convenience of it. It's going to be hard to change that. But in terms of the situation, like states not being decided, this cannot be the new normal, man. You cannot let COVID change how this is done. This was a process back in 2016, 2012, 2008. Obviously, we had the 2000 situation. That was because it was extremely, 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 extremely close. Closer than the 2020 election, which took days to count, supposedly. The other thing that I'm really not understanding, and look, maybe somebody can explain this to me, if you are if the votes are being counted in Pennsylvania and they say, oh, we're going to bed for the night, okay, well, and you're at 85% done, how is it not done by the next day? Where are you getting the ballots from? Shouldn't you have all the ballots at that point? You're 85% done. 85% of the votes are in. I know there's issues to where maybe it's not 100% in, but you should be able to get it to 99% by that next day. Why is it taking 3 or 4 days to find ballots? How does that make sense? It blows my mind. You should already have all the ballots on election night. And especially even if 1 or 2 come in late, it shouldn't affect, there shouldn't be thousands coming in on, let's Friday when the election's on Tuesday. It's just ridiculous. So that just doesn't make sense to me either. But this is something we do not want at all. And I do think that is honestly a major issue if it's not done on election night. It's very annoying to deal with that. And obviously, dude, we already know with the MAGA base, the people are already concerned as it is. Now, Trump's apparently, they've got so many poll watchers now. They've got a whole apparatus, multiple teams in all the big states. So hopefully that'll calm people's nerves a little bit. But I can tell you guys, I see in my chat all the time, they're going to steal it. They're going to rig it. Let's not do the black pill stuff. I know it's tough. Well, this is pretty remarkable. India, population 1.5 billion, counted and reported all votes in one day. France, population 66.5 million. Counted and reported all votes on election night. You can see state by state, but Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania, population of 13 million, is telling you to not expect all votes to be counted on election night. And they say it's normal. They say it's completely normal that they're not all going to be counted on election night. That's unacceptable. That is unacceptable for that to happen when you look at some of these other countries and they say, well, it's all mail-in ballots. Why are the mail-in ballots arriving a week late? Remember when CNN came out and said, the votes are still trickling in on like Thursday. What are we talking about here? The election's over. Where are the ballots coming from? It's like they started finding up their own ass. Oh, I found another ballot. Where are they coming from? Like the whole process is very weird. And then on top of that, they're like, well, it's a confusing situation. You know, you don't know. But how has Florida cracked the code? They've got a big population, and they do all the mail-in ballots right away. Then they do the day of voting, and bam, by about midnight, maybe even earlier, Florida is called. Even very close Florida back in 2016 and 2020, where Trump only won it by a few points. It's not like Ohio where Trump won it by more. Even Ohio was done well to where it's called at a certain point. You've got very close states that can get it done and have their states called by 1, 2 a.m. at the latest. And then they also know that the other thing is with these people, they know that conservatives think if you're going to take 3 or 4 days to count the votes, it's going to be mainly the mail-in ballots. Democrats overwhelmingly have more mail-in ballots than conservatives. And again, if you look back on the 2020 election, this is just I'm just going to explain what happened. The betting odds, live betting had Trump minus 650 to win the election at midnight because people were shocked he won Florida by 3 points. He was winning Pennsylvania. And I know people say, well, the mail-in ballots still had to come in. But just listen to this. He was winning Pennsylvania by like 17 points with like 60% in. So at that point, it's like, oh my God, this is actually going to happen. He's winning all the swing states. We go to bed, we wake up, and poof, it's a miracle. Biden has just enough to go ahead in all the swing states. And you've got black women twerking on stop signs, celebrating a Biden victory. And this dude starts bawling, crying his eyes out when Biden wins. It's total fake crying on ABC. So that's really what happened. And it's like, oh my, this is why it's so ridiculous. And liberals have to understand that this is like, you want to talk about Georgia and how long that state took to count. Trump was leading on election night. Trump was leading after one day. Trump, I think, was leading going into the second day, and the votes kept trickling in. How can liberals support this system? Even if you say, well, there's no voter fraud, election fraud, there's none of that. It was totally clean. What are we doing to where Georgia is taking 3 days to where they're getting votes in on the third day and counting them? Don't you think we maybe should install a better system? Is that not realistic to ask, even if you think there's zero voter fraud? Do you not think, because the thing is, they defended it, they fell on the sword, and they said this is normal and this is standard and this is just how it's done. Because of course, in all the states that took a while to count, they ended up winning, and they could say, well, they outnumbered in terms of mail-in ballots, but it is kind of funny that they won by just enough. They won by 0.3%, 0.7%. That's very convenient. It is very convenient. No, but it's because of the mail-in ballots, and we know liberals have more mail-in ballots, and then they gaslight and say, this is how it was always going to play out. Well, what are you talking about? Trump was minus 650 to win. Even betting markets were admitting he was overperforming everything, even with the mail-in ballots not counted in Pennsylvania, not counted in Michigan, where Trump went ahead early significantly. I don't want to rehash the 2020 election, but even if you think it was 1,000%, there's nothing wrong with it. The way that these states counted their votes was deeply flawed, and you would think even liberals would demand something different to where, what is the difference from 2016 to 2020, where 2016 ridiculously close in all of the swing states? Right? Now, Trump won them all, but they were all very close. Hillary won the popular vote. They were all extremely close. They all get called on election night. 2020, you could say, well, the pandemic, but 2024, we don't have a pandemic. We're not going back. We're not going to go back to 2020. This is unacceptable from Pennsylvania. And they know that conservatives immediately will have questions about the election if they drag the counting of the votes on for multiple days. It's the exact same thing as the SAVE Act when they wanted to, force you to show your ID, and liberals said no because they admitted they wanted illegals to vote. This is the same stuff. Why not just do it and make it totally transparent so people trust the election process? That would be what I would say when it comes to something like this, but this is very concerning. And they're already prepping people for the situation to where it's like, oh, you know, we know it's unfortunate, but it's not going to be solved on election night. It's going to take multiple days. It doesn't mean it's rigged. It doesn't mean anything. Well, technically, they're right, I get. Well, honestly, it's like, where are the votes coming from? I don't understand. We have 4 years to put in a better system. Can we not do that? Can we not put in a better system maybe to do this? And then they try and say, well, Florida had the 2000, a Bush thing where it was obviously a debacle, and Bush barely won. Florida ended up winning, and people thought that was rigged. Liberals did. And so Florida then ups their voting infrastructure. They change their whole apparatus. They spend a bunch of money on it. But that doesn't explain 2016 and how easy they were able to count the votes in all of the swing states that were extremely close. They were not blowouts. Trump won the swing states almost by the same amount, by a little bit more, but almost by the same amount as Biden did. They were all extremely close, and they were all called. So, this whole idea, and then again, how do they respond to the fact that other countries, in Europe, they say there's rampant voter fraud with mail-in ballots. We have to ban mail-in ballots. Like, legitimately, we can't use them anymore because, we just can't handle it. It's too much voter fraud. And look, the thing with mail-in ballots, I know they're going to happen. A lot of it is it's just convenient. You can just do it from home and mail it in. You don't have to worry about going on a specific day to vote. And that's why some Republicans have said, well, maybe we need 3 days. You say no mail-in ballots unless you actually need it, because the problem is you've got a bunch of 27-year-old liberal women just mailing in their ballots. They're perfectly fine, perfectly healthy, but they just mail it in because they're lazy or it's convenient, whatever. Obviously the mail-in ballots were mainly for older people, disabled people, people that actually needed to use them and couldn't go to the polls. But I do understand some Americans saying it's just 1 day. What if we miss it? So that's why Republicans have said, well, what about 3 days? There's no mail-in ballots unless you absolutely need it. You need an exemption to get a mail-in ballot. Other than that, everyone has to show up to the polls, but we give you more times. We give you multiple days to be able to go to the polls and cast a vote. Would that open you up to maybe other things happening? Or would they be counting the votes? Would it be like an election week thing? I don't know what the exact right way to do it is. But this lunacy where it takes 4 days. All right, 2020, I can kind of understand it because it was a debacle with a bunch of stuff happening with the pandemic and limited resources. But we're not going to do this thing again. You don't get to say, well, because this happened in 2020, it's going to happen in 2024. We're at a different time now. We're not dealing with the pandemic variable. That's just my opinion. So it's a total cop-out to say, oh, because it happened in 2020, we're also not going to have the results on election night in 2024. No, you had the COVID excuse in 2020. There's no excuse in 2024. You did it in 2016. It was done by 2 a.m. And that is really the reality of the situation. So guys, that's just my opinion. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.